Thank you for joining our call this morning. My name is Thomas Bagge. I'm the CEO and Statutory Director of DCSA, or the Digital Container Shipping Association. We are really proud and pleased with the amount of attention that's being shown all around the world to our track and trace standards, and we also very much appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Unfortunately, I am, due to prior commitments, unable to be with you live, so we've recorded this introduction from my side, and then I'll hand it over to Henning Schleyerbach, the COO of DCSA. Shipping has an innovative history, and with the invention of the containers in the 1950s, the global expansion of the shipping lines in the 80s, 90s, and of course the invention of the mega ships, containerization has had an enormous impact on the economic growth that we have seen in recent years. Any small shipper can reach any market all over the world and at very, very affordable prices. It is often said that a pair of sneakers in the US or the European market, a pair of sneakers produced in Asia, that is, the cost of those or the transportation cost of those is only 50% or 50 cents. Now, for all the good things containerization has done and the innovations that we've seen on the operational side, the customer experience has not really followed suit, and it is still an industry that in many ways are behind more advanced, digitally advanced industries such as banking, telco, travel, and so on. At DCSA, it is our mission and hope, and also our vision, that we in less than a decade will be able to operate shipping or container shipping the way that we are used to operate online banks, the way we are used to when we do travel, or the way that we are used to interact on our phones, where we roam seamlessly and get data across the world. We hope that with this small webcast, we will give you sort of an insight into some of the things that we are working on from a DCSA perspective. The track and trace standards is only the first step out of many, but it's a fundamental step, because without actually agreeing on the operational events of the shipping cycle, it will be very hard for future innovations to be built on. Our plans following the operational side is to work more on documentation. The documentation side, we know, is a major pain point for many shippers, consignees, and other stakeholders such as banks, authorities, and we are generating enormous amounts of waste that are transported all over the world in terms of paper bill of lading, letters of credit, export permits, certificates of origin, and so on. All this is something that we want to work on being digitized. So we hope that today's webcast will give you some inspiration of why we started where we are. It will give you some inspiration of where we are taking the industry and what we've achieved so far. Thank you very much again for joining. Thank you for your active participation, and we certainly hope that we can count on you in the future as well to validate, to bring comments, and to help collaborate for a more digitally advanced container shipping industry.
Okay, welcome everyone. That was our welcome message from Thomas Bagge, who unfortunately is not able to join that call today. But I'm more than happy to take it over and take you through the details of our second big publication and the first standards publication on track and trace. Couple of words about myself. I have a history of more than 20 years in container shipping. Worked in IT at Hapag-Lloyd before, and also on the commercial side, looking into sales and customer service there. And I joined DCSA full-time last year in July. And since then, we have been working on the track and trace standards. You may ask yourself, why did DCSA pick track and trace as the initial theme to start on standardization? And we have actually had 3 criteria that we have been evaluating to pick that C. As Thomas mentioned in his welcome speech, the industry has not been very much focused on customer experience so far, and we are bound to change this now. And we believe that visibility of where the boxes are, when are they about to arrive, what is the status of my shipment in terms of, let's say, VGM submission or booking confirmation. These are very relevant points, and the means that we are providing, or that the shipping lines are providing today in that respect, are by far not transparent and visible enough. So this is one of the reasons. We also looked at simplification of cross-industry collaboration, and with our mission of DCSA, we are also looking to enable digital innovations. So if we look at these 3 criteria for the shipping lines customers, so for shippers, freight forwarders, consignees, the visibility is the strongest element that we wanted to focus on, while for our members, the cross-industry collaboration and enablement of digital innovation was high on their agenda. And just one example of what we mean with enablement of digital innovations, we believe based on a common standard, and we will come to that later in the presentation. If we envision that all of our members implement that API that we have just published earlier this week, we can enable visualization in a mobile app, for instance, or large software providers can step in and just call that API and build their solutions, UI solutions on top of that. And this would then happen without innovation from the shipping lines, which sometimes have quite traditional IT departments, or could have traditional IT departments. And we believe that this mix of using the experience from the shipping lines plus innovation, like we also saw in banking, for instance, could really add a lot of value to the whole ecosystem. So this is why we started on track and trace. For our members, it was also, if you're probably aware that at the moment track and trace information is mainly shared via EDI links, and that can be a nightmare in terms of maintenance. And our members jointly probably have some 100,000 different individual EDI connections with terminals, with depots, with platforms, with customers, and that is quite a burden to keep it up to date all the time. So switching that to one common API definition, we also believe can release some capacity to then focus more on customer experience and innovation. On the next slide, I would like to explain to you how we tackle a scene if we start working on it. So on the left here, you see our 9 members. And we have 1 to 2 nominated subject matter experts from each of our members, and that forms quite a substantial team of industry experts. And what we also found is we had quite a diversity in the team. So we had people from customer service, we had IT architects, we had interface specialists, we had people with a process background. So it was a very diverse team, which enabled everybody to learn from each other, but it also enabled the group to come to quite a broad solution with a lot of quality and different perspectives in it. Anyhow, we didn't only focus on the expertise that we had within our members. We also identified a group of, we call them key stakeholders, that we consulted twice in the development of the standards. At the first time, we started looking into existing standards, because DCSA is not about we are now the smartest guys to come up with just a new standard. It is about reaching alignment, especially across our members, for adoption going forward. So we were looking at existing standards and also looking into options for us to define and align upon. And we were also in touch with the individual organizations that you can see here. So we had rather portal software solution providers like Intra, TradeLens or GT Nexus, but we were also dealing with standardization bodies, most important, most and foremost UNC Factier, but also ISO, BIC or SMDG have found their way into our standard, and we build upon individual elements of their solutions. We consult them a second time right before we published. So in late December, early January, they had time to review our publication and provide us with feedback before we published openly. And this was again to validate our standard solution before we publish. And then we go out to publish, and this is what we are doing right now, or since the last 2 weeks. So we publish openly on our website, we announce it on LinkedIn, and press release, and we are seeking for your feedback. So it's not that this standard is now cast in stone. It's for us a first and foundational step into that universe. And it's now a call for adoption also with our members, and we will have a slide on that one later. So we saw first commitments already from Intra, for instance, to adopt it, and of course also all our members committed to come up with a solution in the course of this year. What have been the big milestones towards this track and trace standard? I think the foundation was our first publication in September 2019, which we called the Industry Blueprint. And it was in the end about the process. So we came together with a group of experts. We tried to align on what are the things we are doing, what is the sequence in which we are doing it, how do we call it, and try to harmonize all these steps, including who are the involved parties. For instance, if we are receiving a shipping instruction draft, or if we are sending a track and trace message, if we are loading a box, who are the involved parties? Because this was then the basis for step 2, which is the current publication, where we were deriving an information model from it. So it's a data model with the structure, entity types, and attributes. And we use that model because we believe we can reuse it for multiple interfaces. This is why we did the foundational data modeling work. And on that basis, we then defined the interface definitions for track and trace, and also event naming structure and naming conventions. And we will see the events also later on. And the events are mainly the content of the track and trace interface. So in the end, track and trace is only about getting information about progress of my shipment, and this is consisting out of planned and actual events, and we will see that later in the presentation. But it's not only the interface definition, and that was a very insightful workshop we had in October. It's also about adoption. So a standard doesn't stop with a publication on our website. It needs to be adopted. So we have been discussing with our experts, how can we reach a fast and highly compliant level of adoption for this standard. And we said probably the technology of choice, it's the standard itself is technology agnostic, but the technology of choice going forward for the time being is going to be API. And this is why actually only yesterday we have published also our open Swagger API definitions. And the reason for that is twofold. One is synergies, because we believe if you want to build an API, you need to start with a Swagger interface, or most of the developers will start with a Swagger definition anyhow. And the second thing is compliance with the standards. As we believe building a Swagger definition on top of just the interface and information model that we have published before still leaves a lot of room for interpretation, and we wanted to cut out that as much as possible. So this is why we now say a compliant implementation, if you want to use an API of our track and trace interfaces, needs to follow this API Swagger definition that we have published on Swagger Hub. It's open source, it's there for everybody to use it and build connected to their systems. And we believe that by choosing this way and developing it almost, or carrying it that far, we can reach a super high level of compliance to the standard and uniform implementations across all of our members, but also across other stakeholders in the ecosystem. And yeah, we are convinced that this is crucial for the success of a standard, because I was mentioning that that struggle that we had with EDI, where we had too many flavors, and that was exactly because in our view it left too much room for interpretation. So this is why we took it that far this time, and time will tell if that works out or if we need to fine-tune it even further. But on the next slide, let me go into a little bit deeper into the second part, track and trace standards. See if that moves exactly, and what we wanted to achieve and why. What do we mean with the DCSA information model? So we believe that it is important to align on what are the objects we are dealing with, what are the attributes, and it even goes down into the formats of the attributes. So if we are talking about a date or a time, if we are talking about a place, we need code lists, because it's not enough to say we have a text qualifier where you have 20 characters and you can specify the terminal location. Because then in the end you end up with every carrier using a different code list for the terminal specification. So the discussions we had with our experts were going down to that level, and we finally choose here, for instance, the SMDG code list for terminal specification. For inland container handling places, we were following the codes that we got from BIC. And we are currently engaged with both organizations to also identify how can we make these code lists even more, I would say, machine readable, to really use it in a machine-to-machine communication to enable a validation, because we believe it is not only a one-off definition, it's also a process. So where you can validate your codes, it's also a process of how to change these codes. And in the ideal case, we manage to set up a process where you can get new codes that reflect the real world within days or maximum a week. And it shouldn't take long, because otherwise we again come up with alternative codes, and we don't have the compliance to the standard that we are hoping to get. Going one step down, this is a little bit of user stories where we see the benefits from this information model, and we believe for our members, but also for partners, and this can reduce complexity and maintenance, and it can improve time to market, and thus reduce costs and errors in cross-industry operations for a software provider, and can reduce resources bound to maintain legacy solutions, and thus free up resources to develop new digital services instead, which will then be beneficial for everyone in the ecosystem. And for standardization organizations, we have done the exercise to map it against EDIFACT standard, to map it against the UNCFACT models. So we are sure in where we are the same, and we also try to stick to the same wording, and where we are different, and we have a reasoning for that. And that enables to understand the shipping's shared requirements, definitions, and technical specifications, and also develop likely standards, or like standards into the same direction. So we are in touch, closely in touch with UNCFACT, and we are also trying to influence and get some of our topics back into their data model. So there's a huge interest from our side to not to keep the gap between our model and the UNCFACT model as small as possible. But we still felt that we would need that flexibility to enable fast API definitions on basis of our own model. On the next slide, just a little bit on the interface definition. So we have looked at the information model, now at the interface. So in the end, it's a series of standard PUML diagrams that many of you will recognize. So like use case diagrams, activity diagrams, class diagrams. But what's most important from our view is the list of inputs and outputs that we have defined as well. And if we're talking track and trace, the input can be a booking reference, a shipment number classically, could be a bill of lading number, or an equipment reference, a container number in this case. And you will then get all the events that are relevant for these in this context. This is the interface output down here. It is built around the events that can occur for that specific shipment, equipment, or transport journey. And this is again following our process model. And the next slides will explain a little bit more in detail what we actually mean. Good. So let me switch to the next slide, which is showing you the event structure that we have defined. So from our processes in the industry blueprint, we have identified 3 journey types. One is following the container itself. The other one is following the object that is currently transporting the container. So let's just take the vessel, but it could also be a truck or a train. And the last one is following the shipment. It's rather the documentation journey that Thomas was also referring in his video message. For each of these journeys, we have defined parameters. Just need to get rid of the controls here for a while. So there could be an event classifier, a transportation mode, an event type or facility type. And if we just pick an example for the transport journey, it could be a planned rail arrival at an inland terminal. And this combination of the structure that we have defined with permitted values and the combination out of these values is then forming an event. And there are, of course, allowed combinations of events and forbidden combinations, and this is defined in a combination rule document, which is also part of our standard. If we look one step further, so we have the 3 journey types. For the equipment journey, we have an event classifier, an event type, an empty indicator, because it matters if the box is full or laden, and a facility type. For the transport journey, we have a transportation mode. So is it rail, truck, or sea in the end? And for the shipment journey, we only look into a shipment information type, which could be a type of a document, and the type of the event. So if we look at this now for each journey separately, we can see for the equipment journey, we have the event classifier, which could be planned, estimated, or actual. We have an event type reflecting a load, a discharge, gate in, gate out, stuffing or stripping. We have the empty full indicator, which is indicating if we have cargo inside the box. So we actually did not pick full because it's not necessarily that the box is full. So at the moment when we have cargo inside the box, we treat it as a laden box, no matter if it's 5%, 10%, or 100% full. We have the transport mode, which could be vessel, barge, truck, or rail. We have this is in brackets, shown in brackets here, because for stuffing and stripping, so when the box is, we have an event where the box is not moving, we don't have a transportation mode. And finally, we have a facility type, which could be a depot, a customer location, a port or an inland terminal, could be a container yard, or for stuffing and stripping, could also be a container freight station. Let's now move on to the event structure of the transport journey. So if we follow the object which is transporting the box, again we have the event classifier, which could be planned, estimated, or actual. We have in any case the transportation mode because it is being transported. The event type in this case is just an arrival and a departure. And for the facility type, we have all the facilities that apply for a movement event. So we have a depot, could be again a customer location or terminal, could be a container yard, freight station, or even a border crossing, which becomes relevant in terms of customs declarations. If you look at these structures, and maybe I go one step back for the equipment journey again, you can see that we are following more or less a business language. And I think this is also one of the main reasons why we have chosen to come up with our own information model. We are trying to define a domain language which is specific for maritime containerized transportation, because we believe that this language is helping all the stakeholders that are involved in that process to understand what we actually mean. And let me give you one example of the discussions that we had. we could, for the event type, for instance, just say it is in and out. Because if you have an actual in at a terminal with a truck, that's a gate move. If you have an out at a terminal with a vessel, that's a load move. So you could even reduce it in the complexity and put it in a very simplified and pretty theoretical structure. However, we consider this is not appropriate to easily understand it as a human. So for a machine, that would be fine. For a human, we believe it's way more beneficial to call it a load if we load the box on a vessel, and call it a gate in if we receive the box at a terminal from a truck. So even though this is you could tell part of this structure from the combination of the events, we considered it meaningful to give it to follow the language which is used by the business. And this is explaining most of the discrepancies that we see between our own model and the UNCFAC model. Let me go to the shipment journey, which is a little bit different from the other two. So it has only 2 parameters, and it's following the documentation stream. So we have different type of documents, and we will look into standardization of those as well going forward. At the moment, we are only looking at the event type. So we are following a booking, a shipping instruction, VGM submission, shipment release, transportation document, arrival notice, DG declaration, or all of gauge declaration. And what we are following and what you can get information on from our API is the status of this document. So has it been received? Has it been confirmed? Has it been issued? Has it been approved, submitted, surrendered, rejected, or is it pending an approval? And of course, again, here, not all combinations are allowed. Some make sense. And this is clearly defined in the combination rules. So it is not yet providing you with the content of a shipping instruction. It's not yet providing you with the details of a bill of lading. However, you can follow the status of these documents. And this, in our view, was a meaningful first step to start with. Good, let's move on with the open API definitions. And also here, I need to get rid of the controls here. No, it's not working, sorry. I don't want to leave the webinar. Okay. Sorry, just need a second for this. Just using too much space on my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have the right button. Thanks, Ellen. So the API definition, I already explained why we came up with API definitions. So some discussions were around this is already entering implementation. However, we are building the standards to have them implemented and to have it highly conformant. So this is why we said we help you and everybody who wants to adopt these standards in their implementation by providing open API definitions on Swagger Hub. And we actually just published this yesterday. And I have another slide showing where you find it. But it's important to understand also for the APIs, what is the context that we are covering right now. And you can see this indicated by the arrows in here. So we are covering the part which is required to query a carrier for all the events that we have just seen in the structure before. We are not yet looking at the supply side. Obviously, these event data is generated by ports and depots or other stakeholders and pushed to the carriers today using EDIFACT standards mainly. So this one is not yet covered by the API, but it's on our agenda. It will follow. And we currently have a pull API definition. So if you have a shipment reference, you can contact the carrier of choice that is transporting these goods, and you will get all the event data back. What we are not yet having is a subscription. And we know that for the EDI at the moment, most of the data is exchanged on a subscription level. So this is also on our agenda for some of the upcoming releases. But what we have right now is if you have a list of a container number, a shipment number, a BL reference, you can get all the relevant event data from the carriers that are looking into this. And we believe this is an important first step, and it could provide pretty interesting solutions already on that basis. So it gives you all the information. It's just not all the time in the most convenient format. And this is what we are working on, and what's on our agenda as next steps from now. How does it really look like in practice? This is on the next slide. So we said we want to publish our standards where actually the developers are. So you find it on Swagger Hub and the supporting documents on GitHub. And from there, you can really start generating your own code in the language of choice. And you can start implementing these APIs by connecting them to your own database and ERP systems wherever you need them. And you can also use these API definitions to implement a call for this API in your system where you need the data that you want to pull from the carriers. The next slides are about feedback and adoption. I just need to check, but we are well in time. We still have 10 more minutes to go. We will also be able to answer some questions. So we believe standard adoption requires a joint approach, and it's not going to be easy. And we are also preparing our members that the standardization work that they have engaged with DCSA is probably only the first quarter of all the workload, and adopting these standards is the remaining 75%, but they are all committed. So what do we have in here? If we look at the reference stakeholders, we already got a statement from Intra that they are compliant. So we are waiting for their first API definition to come up. We also heard from our members that there are first freight forwarders already looking into the adoption without being able to disclose any names at the moment. And obviously our carriers and our members are committed to implement. So I personally expect quite some implementations already by the middle of this year. However, there's also a very powerful lever that some of you in this call can pull, because if you are a freight forwarder, a shipper, a consignee, you can address this with your carriers where you are buying your transportation services from, and you can ask them about their implementation time frame. And this is also helping our members, because we are dealing with the IT departments. So if you raise these requirements in one of their commercial discussions, that could ease priority for the IT projects on the IT departments. And I think that can be super strong. And it's important because standards and implementing standards can sound in an IT project portfolio prioritization session like a pretty dry topic. So it's important that also the commercial organizations of our carriers get confronted with standard adoption and the benefit this creates for their customers. So this is something we have been discussing with our members, and we as DCSA also want to pick this up and form a reference user group that we use to get frequent feedback on our latest releases, but also on our backlog and what we want to cover going forward, and if we are pointing into the right direction. And this is actually the last slide that we have for today. So we really love to get your feedback on the standards. We are sure that they are not yet perfect, and it's only the first step that we are taking. But we are actually very proud of all the work and the results that we could put together in quite some short time. But we are waiting and eager to get your feedback. So how can you contribute and engage? First of all, where do you find the details? So you find everything on our website, dcsa.org, under initiatives. And you can view it online. You can download PDF copies. And we also have a feedback feature right on our website, provided by a small startup called UserSnap. And that allows you to make a small screenshot, leave your email address, leave a comment right in the publication document, and makes it a lot easier for us also to follow what you really mean, so that you have a good chance that we can reflect that in one of the upcoming revisions of our standards. Following this call, we have also prepared a quick survey, and we really ask you to contribute to that survey and give us your feedback. It only takes, it shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 minutes to complete that. And this is also where you have an option to register for our reference user group. And as the standards shall finally improve the customer experience, we are especially looking for shippers and freight forwarders for this. But if you are, I don't know, a software provider, a small startup, or any other stakeholder, just give us the reasoning why you think we should collaborate and work together with you. There's a small free text field where you can leave that in the survey, and we will then try to get in touch with you, but we need to balance this out a little bit. And we ask for your understanding that we will focus our feedback activities mainly on the group of shipping lines customers. And now I would like to open it up for questions. Ellen, what is it that we have?
Okay, we have one question I think you already addressed, which is how we can collaborate. And I think that's the reference user group. And again, if you give us some context, and it will help us also sort through the messages. There's one question about what other standards organizations or alliances that we compete with.
Compete with?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, I would say none, because I mean, for me also, standardization area was new, and it was like a new universe I was entering. What I found there is there's a lot of voluntary work done. There's a lot of passionate work done by individuals that spend really, in many cases, their free time and their weekends or Friday nights on a call to make these things happen. Just because they see the necessity, and yeah, they just like to get engaged in this work. It's a little bit like an open source community, which can be super powerful, but this area is really lacking manpower and investments. And I believe with DCSA, we are not trying to push anybody out of this area. We are rather trying to join forces and to make these standards happen faster and maybe in a broader scale. Why do I believe that this is required? The pace in how we see innovations coming up is accelerating. And this is challenging now the shipping lines, but I would say any stakeholder in the ecosystem who's developing services, IT solutions, or transportation services, to keep up with that, with that change frequency. And you can do that if you are super rich and you have unlimited resources, but most of us don't. So standardization is really helping each and everyone to free up resources from legacy work and to concentrate their resources on innovation and customer experience and adjusting their solutions to the customer needs and the possibilities that new technologies open. And so this is our mission, and this is what we are getting engaged in. So we are not in competition with other standardization bodies. We are rather joining forces.
Okay. Now we start to have a whole bunch of questions pouring in. Let's see if we can get through a couple of these, and I think the rest will have to get back to people.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. How are you handling confidentiality and security as it relates to private information?
Mm-hmm. So what we publish, and all our members know that, is open source. So there are three founding pillars of DCSA. That's we are non-for-profit, we are vendor neutral, and we publish open source. And we tell this to the key stakeholders as well as to our members. So we are not able to protect their IP. Of course, they have a chance to review our publication before, but what they contribute in a working group is there to share it with the world. And I believe that we managed, and we are still doing it, but we managed to separate the whole set of topics into something where we believe collaboration makes sense, and another area where we believe there's room for competition across our members, which of course is still there. But we started with a foundational ground of an area, defining an area where we believe collaboration is more successful than competition. And of course, we obey the rules from competition law. And developing track and trace standards, for instance, is a field, or working on cybersecurity. But let me just answer the question with an example. If we look at the industry blueprint, all the members shared their process models with us, but not with their competitors, and they would never have done that. So DCSA can also act as a filter between the members, because we then worked out the consolidated process model, and we fed it back to every single member with a mapping. So how does he recognize his own processes in the resulting industry blueprint without disclosing their confidential information to the other members. So this is one role that we can play as an independent and non-for-profit body in the middle.
Okay, great. There's one more question. I think this is probably the last one we can answer, just given the time. We have a lot of questions, just so that you know, we have a lot of questions around the details of the track and trace publication, who we're working with, and if somebody is not on the list, why not? There are some general questions about membership, and so we'll definitely get back to everyone with all the questions. And the one thing, I think the one question I want to probably end this webinar on, because a couple of people have asked the same question, is are we trying to be the IATA of the airline industry?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer. So I think we try to get inspired by IATA, and it was always kind of the theme when we were founding DCSA. If we look at the history of IATA, that is a big, big goal. Yeah, and so we need to be independent from that. But in the end, we get inspired. We are meeting them every once in a while. We are looking into, for instance, how they achieved the e-ticketing, how long it took them to reach 70% adoption of e-airway bill. We're trying to get inspired by that. But there are other things that IATA is doing that we will probably never do. I mean, they are organizing all the refueling of the jets. I don't think that DCSA will ever do that for shipping lines. So we need to define our own identity, but I would say we get inspired by IATA. Yes, that's true.
We're going to collect all the questions from both sessions. We'll organize them and we'll publish them to everyone. So we'll probably do this via email, but also maybe a subset of that will go on our website. Well, thank you very much for joining today, and we'll hope to see you on future webinars and also engage with us. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye-bye.